joint board meeting of the town of Rockingham, Bellows Falls Village and Saxton'S River Village on September 26, 2023 at 6:03 p.m. First item that we will deal with is approval of the meeting minutes of May 30th, 2023.
Move to approve. Second.
Motion is made and seconded that we approve the minutes of the tri-board meeting of Tuesday, May 30th, 2023. Is there any discussion, corrections? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The motion carries. Next item is an addition to the agenda for routine administrative matters and/or pressing matters that will require ratification at a future meeting. Item number 9, we're going to add Rick and Bonnie with their survey on town meeting. Is there anything else to be added to the agenda? Seeing nothing, I will move on to public comment on items not on the agenda. And at this point, I know we have our librarian and some of the members of the board here. And I don't know if you guys want to start out with anything or any comments?
We appreciate your interest in hearing about how things are going. I'm Carol Blackwood, the chair of the library board, and I'm sure most of you know Ian Graham, who is our director. He's been there coming on 2 years now. And we think things are going along quite well. We've got a lot of new programs. You might have seen the Biblio bike, which has actually gotten national attention around town. You know, if you want to see it soon, you better get in touch with us, because when it snow flies, we put it away for the winter. And but Ian can give you some more details, but certainly if you have any questions for us, we are here, and there's several of us, so.
I guess I would just say it's nice to be invited to the meeting, and you know, in future meetings, if you want any reports from us or anything, we're happy to do it. Generally, we present the library board puts together the fiscal year budget in October and November, and then we present that to the select board, who is responsible for putting budgets onto the town warning for the town meeting in the December meeting. So, you know, we look forward to doing that. We don't anticipate any significant changes. Last year, I had the chance to sort of telegraph or warn people that there were some building issues, but the most expensive one we were concerned about was the fact that all the locks were failing on the doors, and the quotes that we had for that were sort of frightening and alarming, which is why I brought it to the attention of the select board. And since that time, we've managed to have it fixed for nothing. And so we're very grateful to have the chance to tell you that that expense is no longer in the cards going forward. And so what we're down to probably talking about this fall is what a reasonable, since the building had a renovation about 10 years ago, and you know, it's aging a little bit, what really would be good for the town to be having a conversation about what the reasonable annual upkeep for that building would be as a municipal building, since it's never really been budgeted for. And I think that, you know, I worked in higher ed for a long time, and people love to pay to have expensive buildings put up and then never pay to keep them up. And so there was this wonderful concept called deferred maintenance that usually added up into the hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars over time. We're nowhere near that. I think that for a small amount of, you know, $10,000-ish a year in the library budget or the town budget of the municipal, and this municipal building could be kept up in a way that honors the fact it's the most recently renovated building in town, and it'll save money down the road by, you know, just tending to the things that need to be cared for in real time. A good example of that is the front steps, which are these large granite stone steps, were deconstructed, I've learned, during the renovation, but as that project was modified, they were simply put back into place. The expectation was apparently to have the front brought out a little bit, the costs didn't allow that. So when they were put back, what wasn't done is the foundation wasn't sort of rebuilt underneath them. And also, they haven't been regularly, sealed and grouted, which means that water gets into them. And so that foundation is, kind of degrading in real time. So that sounds like a wonderful grant opportunity because there are historic steps and there are stonemasons who do stuff. So we're going to start investigating that. But if we had a small budget line that would address those kinds of annual upkeep costs, we would avoid getting ourselves into these situations for this municipal building that these are normal wear and tear kind of things. This is Vermont, so there's all sorts of torrential rains and heavy snowfall and water getting everywhere. And the building's in really good shape, the locks are fixed, but that last year's kind of warning has just turned into a routine kind of conversation about what a reasonable upkeep budget line would be for the building. And all that said, I'll say what I said at the beginning is we're really grateful to have the opportunity to be invited here and meet with you all. And then in the future, we're happy to go to any meetings that you'd like us to attend and report on specifics or generalities as you see fit. And then the other thing I would say, just one more thing, is that I see a lot of you in the library, and it's nice to see you here. And then some of you I don't see in the library, and I look forward to seeing you in the library.
And issuing you a card.
And issuing you a card and all that stuff. So anyway, thank you for having me.
Well, you've had a lot of really good programming there lately. Kudos to Ann Dempsey, I think, for that, right?
Absolutely.
But I've been noticing some really interesting things happening there at the library, which is great.
Thank you. And I think the other thing worth mentioning, like we've had these 2 diner events, which have been really well attended and popular. And I think that it would be great for the town to, understand, recognize that it's a wonderful meeting space for town events to take place. It's a lovely room upstairs. It holds a lot of people. Again, it's a municipal building, so it's like any town events, it's a very suitable spot for those. And we're always happy to stay open late in the evening and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Rockingham Public is very grateful for being there.
Yeah, it's been a lot of wonderful things.
Yes.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Wendy Levy, and I live in Bellows Farm, and I am a library trustee. I was elected to a 3-year term in March, and tacking on to what Ian was saying, I'm asking for it to be on the next trustees agenda that we have some sort of regular meetings, either at just the Rockingham select board meetings or maybe the village trustee meetings too, just to for those of us trustees to give you just a brief report if anything's coming up, so that you're hearing from us more than once a year during budget season, just to keep lines of communication open and allow you folks and members of the public to ask us questions. So depending on how that goes at the next meeting, you may be seeing some of us more regularly.
Okay, great.
Thank you, and thanks for having us tonight.
Yes.
I have a quick question. You can talk about, does your budget now have a line item for upkeep and maintenance?
The budget now has a line item basically for maintenance contracts. And so we have an elevator, so we have an elevator contract, an HVAC system, but anything that happens that isn't covered by the terms of that regular annual maintenance tends to be expensive, in the hundreds or $1,000, not outrageous, and isn't really contained very nicely in that line. I think when that line was set up a number of years ago, there was more cushion in it for those kind of unanticipated expenses, but they simply have gotten more expensive over time and the line hasn't really grown with them. So there is an established line. It's just a matter of, I think, adjusting it to make it more realistic to address those kinds of regular annual things. For example, last example, then I'll shut up, but the pillars in front are due for painting. You have to kind of get up close to them to see, but this is one of the principal buildings that you see as you come into town. It looks nice. It could look nicer, but in 5 years without, I think, some minimal investment in it, it won't look as nice. And so it gives people an impression of the town as they come into town from the south, heading into the thing. It's a grand building. It was funded by Andrew Carnegie. It is one of 4 Carnegie libraries in the state of Vermont. It's an important building historically. It sits perched way up on top of the hill and stuff, between 2 beautiful buildings, the Armory and the Temple. And so it's really worth it, again, just the regular responsible maintenance of the building so that it's not just holding itself together well, but gives a good impression for the town itself as people come in.
Any other public comment? Yes.
Yeah, Robert McBride. I just had a sort of a clarity, because I get a little confused at these meetings. As you guys go through the agenda, and you have your discussion, can the public then raise their hand and chime in, or is it after everything's been discussed, the public can make a comment or ask a question?
Well, I think that if you have questions or whatever, raise your hand. If I don't see you, just
Okay,
Peter will help me make sure that, yeah, we certainly want to include the public in a lot of this. Any other public comment? Anything else? Okay, we'll move on to the managers report.
Try to get a new ice machine maybe. Anyway, couple things just quickly, trying to finish up summer projects. So there has been some work on Pine Street that will hopefully be completed by the end of the month, which will be the last concrete portion of sidewalk that we'll do this year. We have a lot of discussion and the budget process about sidewalks and moving forward with sidewalks, and there'll be a lot of discussion as well this evening. But that will be the last of our currently scheduled work in the village, as well as we will still have some asphalt sidewalk replaced out in Saxton'S River. The same Springfield paving that did our paving this summer will come out and finish that. He's on some other paving jobs. He did tell me he'd be out probably sometime in October. So he'll get that done. Plenty of time to go before the plants close, right around Thanksgiving. So at least for that portion, that'll close us out on this year's capital work. And we'll have, I'm sure, plenty to discuss as we go through the budget process with a whole host of other items. So keep it simple. We have a lot of presentations tonight, so I'll keep it short.
Okay. Any questions or comments for the manager? If not, we'll move on to the agenda. Item 1 on the agenda is presentation by Kati Gallagher. And I see her on the Zoom, so.
Admit, I think Gary's gonna go ahead. I'm gonna make him our, I think, Gary, I'm gonna make you our host, and then you can share the screen, or do you want to share it direct with?
Katie, did you want to share the PowerPoint, or would you like me to?
Yeah, I can do it if I have the ability to share my screen. Which looks like it's currently disabled.
I think that's the best we're gonna be able to do. What are those 3 dots by her name? Yeah, I was trying to get her to see if she could do it. Have her host and see if that'll work. All right, Katie, hopefully we don't lose you on Zoom.
All right.
Should-
Okay, are we seeing that? All right, let's make this into slideshow. Okay, well, thank you everybody for having me tonight. I'm really sorry I'm not able to be there in person, although I was able to stop by and use your EV charger in Bellows Falls this weekend, which I greatly appreciated and was really nice to be able to swing by. I'm Kati Gallagher. I'm here wearing 2 different hats tonight. The first is with the Vermont Natural Resources Council, which is a statewide environmental group, and I lead our Sustainable Communities program. And as part of that work, which is generally focused on supporting our downtowns and community centers to increase our opportunities for housing and transportation and infrastructure and make them attractive and viable places to live. I talk a lot about transportation, and so I also help to facilitate the Transportation for Vermonters Coalition, which is a group of service providers in the transportation sphere, other advocates, and folks working on transportation across the state, and really trying to figure out how we make a sustainable and accessible transportation system in a place that we know has some pretty real challenges related to living in a rural state with small communities and so on and so forth. Other connection here is that VNRC runs the Small Grants for Smart Growth program, which I manage, and in 2020 we're able to provide a small grant, some seed funding for the Rockingham Incremental Development Working Group. So really excited to be able to kind of maintain this connection with your community and see how things have been moving forward. So I'm here today to talk about walkability. I'm going to touch really quickly on just like general, why do we care about walkability, and then get a little bit more into some specifics. We could have an entire college seminar on walkability. So this is I'm going to try and keep it as brief and high level as I can, although I could talk your ear off about it. So there's one of the great things about this topic and why I love talking about it is because it touches on so many different areas of kind of community life, both socially, environmentally, economically. So the first is that walkability, and there's a whole lot of studies and data that go behind each of these points that I'd be happy to share at a later date, but it improves local economic vitality. We're going to talk about that more in the next slide. It improves social connections. If we think about especially our older neighbors, we saw an impact during COVID that's pretty frightening, but we have an aging population, and reducing social isolation in particular is a really significant need that we have in all of our communities. So having these places where people can actually get out of their cars and talk to their neighbors, meet new people is really important. Improving physical health. So again, having opportunities to get out of your car, to walk, to bike, to roll somewhere. People generally take those opportunities. And so that means that they are building their exercise routine. It's just kind of built in. But the other component here is street safety. So we know that vehicle accidents are one of our, kind of major contributors to death and some pretty significant injuries. And so not only does getting people out of their cars reduce the potential for those injuries, but it also just by doing some of the things that help to improve walkability, like narrowing our street or adding a crosswalk or things like that, that actually helps to slow cars down and to help them, all of us be more aware of our surroundings. And so it's actually shown that, whether you're walking or driving, in general, promoting walkability promotes safety for driving and for those around them. Beyond social connections, community vibrancy is another really awesome kind of benefit of walkability, because you are creating these community centers or building on your existing community centers that have your commercial core, you have housing, you have services, maybe a school or a church. And so this is reducing sprawl. You're creating this center that people want to be and spend time in. And that means that it's also going to reduce traffic congestion and have those kind of waterfall benefits. Having that sense of place and community identity, I think you can all imagine, when you think about, if I ask you to think about what does, Bellows Falls look like, or what does Burlington look like? Generally, your mind goes to those community centers, because those are the places where we are able to get out of our cars and actually walk around and spend time. And all of these things actually help to reduce crime in a lot of different ways, but a big one is just because you have more people on the street and kind of eyes around. So to the extent that that is a challenge that a community might face, having those opportunities for people to actually walk around but want to spend time in those places is really helpful for general crime reduction and quality of life. My next point is accessibility and equity, which is a huge one that I think really gets overlooked a lot, unfortunately. There is a significant population of Vermonters that don't have access to vehicles, and that's either because they're older or they're younger and they don't have their driver's license yet, or maybe they lost their license or they don't want to drive. There's a whole range of issues why people might not have access to a car, and we need to provide them with mobility options. We are generally, as a state and our communities, really not doing that, or to the extent that we are, it's not kind of valued in the same way that we value people who are driving. So providing safe mobility options for folks is a huge accessibility issue. It's also an affordability issue because, as we all know, owning or leasing a car, managing a car is really expensive, especially in the Northeast. So keeping more money in people's pockets is another significant benefit. And then finally, this is an environmental and a climate issue. Carbon emissions are the leading factor for our greenhouse gas emissions in the state of Vermont, but emissions from cars also are a leading contributor to air and water pollution. So to the extent that we can get less miles being traveled around the state in cars, this is better for our air and water quality and reducing our climate emissions. So I did just want to jump in a little bit more specifically to economics, because I think it's really fascinating and something that folks here would be interested in. And I have at the end of the presentation a list of resources that these numbers come from, and some other resources as well. But just following up on that equity piece first, 3.9% of Rockingham's transportation burden, Rockingham's transportation burden is 3.9%, which means that, I'm gonna hit that person. About 4% of folks' income in the town of Rockingham is spent on transportation. This comes from Efficiency Vermont, just recently released. They have every couple of years an energy burden report that looks at different sectors. And so this is not the highest transportation burden, but it's not the lowest. And it's just something to keep in mind that improving walkability means keeping more money in people's pockets. And if I have more money in my pocket and I feel safe and am attracted to a downtown area because there's a walkable core and I need to go buy something, I am more likely to go spend my money in that downtown area. And in fact, research has shown that there is a 40% increase or so in people who are actually entering shops and spending money in walkable places. Studies have also found a $500 to $3,000 increase in home values in places that have a +1 or more walk score. A walk score is this kind of online tool you can look up, but essentially measures the extent of walkability for any given address. So it increases property values. It also is a way that we can attract talent, and a way that we can attract people to our communities to move here that we need to fill our jobs, to fill our schools, so on and so forth. So this statistic shows that 63% or so of millennials want to live in a place where they don't need a car. I would bet, and I probably should have found this number, but that number is even higher for Gen Z and younger generations. It's actually also true for older generations as well. And AARP Vermont talks a lot about this, and we partner with them a lot because this is a real issue and a real desire for older Vermonters. The graphic on the right is showing tax value per acre. And it's really fascinating. This graphic, I forget where this is exactly, but this is coming from Urban 3, which is an organization that does a lot of these kind of tax analyses. They recently did a report for New Hampshire. They're, I think, currently doing one for Burlington, but they produce these really impactful graphics where you can see the impact of tax value per acre in these walkable downtown cores, as opposed to, the more kind of sprawling outskirts. And so essentially what we're seeing is that it is much more impactful from a municipal finance perspective to be investing in and leveraging your investments in these downtown areas, making them more walkable, continuing to attract local businesses, than it is to have these kind of outskirt development projects that aren't bringing in as much revenue and a much lower return on investment for any municipal investments that are kind of going out to the outskirts. So just two quick kind of success stories from around Vermont in terms of investing in walkable infrastructure. This is Bristol, two images looking at the same kind of viewpoint, I think probably about 10 years apart or so. But this quote is just showing that they made the investments in public infrastructure, in walkability, and that has fostered private development and continued to leverage their public investments in this compact, pedestrian-friendly village. As it says, that retains its historic charm. A lot of this work is from their main, I'm forgetting the exact name of it, Main Street Lighting and something project, but they are actually continuing this work to expand beyond the Main Street and expand their sidewalks into the neighboring neighborhoods around the downtown core. In Brandon, Vermont, you might have heard, they also recently just wrapped up a long and extensive downtown redevelopment project for their streetscape. Again, two different views, or looking at the same kind of view a couple years apart. And this quote is from a co-owner of one of the new breweries in town who's talking about how this work on updating their streetscape actually is part of what attracted them to the town of Brandon. But I also just think it's really interesting how much you can tell from these two images, all the different kind of benefits that come from some of these projects. So in the image on the right, obviously this is hopefully it's obvious. This is the newer image. And just want to highlight, it's not just about adding a sidewalk here, right? Like there was already sidewalks on this street, but now we have these places where there's benches and lighting and plants and there's bump out. So there's a more narrow street. So there's all these things that are making it even more welcoming for people to spend time in addition to actually getting from one place to another. So we achieve walkability in a lot of different ways. Sidewalks and paths are just one of the components of a pedestrian network. And it is not up to the town to have to build out that entire pedestrian network. That would be a lot of money. Some places do that, but I don't think that is what is necessary, especially in our Vermont towns, because there can be things like parks or sometimes it's like crossing through an alleyway, things like that, where people can get from one place to another. But I do think it's up to the towns to think about how that pedestrian network might work, how somebody might be able to get from one place to another, and how we can be contributing to that. So we're focusing here on sidewalks and paths, but just want to kind of highlight that there's all these other different components that make up a pedestrian network. Regardless of what it is that you're working on, we need to make sure that they are connected. So again, we don't have things like dead end sidewalks, and people can actually make the entire route for where they're trying to go, whether that's on a sidewalk and maybe it's you're walking and then getting on the bus and then walking again, or some combination of modalities. It needs to be accessible. So similarly, if somebody is trying to get down the sidewalk and, there's a whole chunk that's disintegrated, or, there's some kind of barrier there, somebody who is in a wheelchair or maybe pushing a stroller, or has some mobility challenge might not be able to continue to cross that street. So it's not always enough, it's not usually enough to just build the first step of infrastructure and then leave it alone. We need to actually make sure that it is viable for people to use that infrastructure. Safety, huge component. If people don't feel safe, they're not going to use it. Or they do use it because they don't have another option. And then again, that, is a pretty big equity problem. And then context sensitivity. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in the next slide, but the project, you don't want to build out a project that isn't relevant to your area, that area of the town, or the town itself. So what I mean by that is, one, you don't want the municipality to spend a huge sum of money, because a lot of these projects do cost something, on a project that isn't really necessary or relevant to your town or to the area or to the goal that you're trying to achieve. So you want it to be relevant in that context. You also want it to be relevant to the extent that you are trying to build something that the residents of your town will use and will appreciate. So for example, I've worked in towns where, a big point of pride is that they don't have any stoplights. And so when we proposed those flashing crosswalk lights, that was an absolute no-go. So we had to kind of work through to figure out what worked best for them. And we could do that, but it's, again, important to kind of recognize what will and won't work for your community. And it's going to be different for everybody. So this is just a quick example of like what a theoretical pedestrian network could look like. So just to highlight again, it's not just sidewalks and crosswalks, but all these other kind of different linkages. But thinking through what those could look like in your town is helpful. And again, no one size fits all. So do what works best for your community, and working with members of your community is how you will figure out how to do that. So, just a couple things here on the left, forgetting which town this is in, but for a more rural area, you don't necessarily need to have a paved street or a paved sidewalk. It might just be supporting people to bike or walk through this path through a farm. The middle image here was in Northfield. This was a pop-up demonstration project. I love pop-up demonstration projects because they can be low cost or free and showcase what's possible in an area and get people engaged and excited. But it might also show you things that don't work in a certain area, which I found through doing demonstration projects. And that's just as valuable as finding things that do work. The image on the lower right is Warren, which I don't think you could probably see really from this image here, but when they were doing their village kind of sidewalk crosswalk project, decided to put in cobblestone crosswalks. They are beautiful. That is a very Warren solution. So again, do what works best for your community. Rockingham and your villages, you have a lot to be proud of. You've done a lot of really fantastic work already. I know that I think you're going to hear more of the specifics of some of what's already happened and what's being proposed by the members of the community. And I just want to note that while there's a lot to be proud of, there's a lot of really good work that's been done. These are similar to roads and bridges and our vehicle infrastructure, in that it is not a one and done type of project. If we are going to value people who are walking and biking and rolling on our streets just as much as we value those who are driving, this needs to be a continuous investment in making sure that the sidewalks are maintained and that we are continuing to build out that connectivity throughout the town. So wrapping up here, how do we do that? These are just a couple key points I want to highlight for things that I've seen and we've talked about with our partners in the transportation sphere for municipalities working through this. Again, sidewalk design and maintenance is really huge. How you do that, again, will be dependent on your needs and your capacity as a municipality. So you might look at different materials, different cost benefits for doing a project one way or another. That is up to you. But ultimately, the maintenance in many communities has been the thing that gets dropped, and that can be almost just as harmful as not building the project to begin with. Thinking about things like connectivity, making sure that you don't have dead end sidewalks, or where a sidewalk ends, there is a crosswalk to some other, either a sidewalk on the other side or a bus stop, or again, whatever option might be most appropriate. But thinking about that pedestrian network component, winter maintenance in Vermont, this is always a big barrier. And I put in ADA requirements, and I think it's connected to the winter maintenance piece. But again, just going back to putting as much value into the people who are using our sidewalks and our bike lanes and things like that, and making sure that we are valuing them at the same level. So that means that we are plowing our sidewalks early and often in a snowstorm. That requires money. And so get down to that in a minute, but it is an investment. It is a prioritization that requires kind of thought and some meaning behind it, that the community needs to make that decision. But that's really what's required for people to use these pieces of infrastructure with regularity. And just want to note that more and more we're seeing towns kind of opening themselves up for potential ADA violations and liability. And so something just to keep in mind as you're thinking about these different projects is that it really is an accessibility issue, and there could be a legal component to it. So again, maintaining and leveraging your existing municipal investments in these downtown cores where you already have, either water or wastewater infrastructure, you have sidewalks, crosswalks, roads. We're trying to bring in more local businesses, new homes, et cetera. These are the areas where you're going to get the highest return on investment. There's also opportunities more and more for intermunicipal coordination and sharing of resources. So that might look like sharing plows. Maybe that's the sidewalk plows, or maybe it's staff. But as I think more Vermont towns realize that these are big efforts, and maybe doesn't make the most financial sense to try and go it alone, there's been more efforts for folks to try to coordinate. And then finally, building that local support among residents and among yourselves and others to prioritize this work is really important to do early and often. And that is what will allow you to actually capitalize on funding opportunities. So we do have several grant programs through the state of Vermont that will help with some of these bigger ticket items and investments. A lot of that funding also comes from the federal government. But one challenge is that they usually come down, the grant program is open for a month or two, and people don't have the project lined up to be able to take advantage of it. And so that's where, your staff can really help you with that. But having that local support building up to the point where you actually have an idea of what that project is that you'd be applying for is really critical to actually move forward with that. So I will stop there. I feel like I've been talking too much. And just to show, I think I have shared my slides with you all, but not sure if you can click on the resources, but these all do have links. And if you don't have a clickable version, I can share this or we can make sure that it gets to you. But here's some studies and some funding resources. So I will leave it there.
Any questions or comments? Yes,
Yeah.
Bonnie.
I've told this story before, so apologies if you've heard it. But I'd like to tell you how I came to be in Bellows Falls. 15 years ago, my son was living in Manhattan and I was living in Baltimore, Maryland. We both wanted to move to a small town. We considered Massachusetts, where we had lived before. And I said, I'd like to look into Vermont. So my son did a Google search, walkable villages in Vermont. And the first thing that came up was this little place called Bellows Falls. We came here and we worked with the realtor. Within 4 months, he had bought his house. It took me a little longer to sell my business and stuff, but a year later, I bought my house. And that's just one small example. But it matters. It matters to people. And we had never heard this way.
Yes.
Whether I'm driving, bicycling, or walking, I really appreciate when each of those have their own lane, because they all travel at very different speeds and safety issues. So if we're thinking about sidewalks, I hope we also think about dedicated bicycle lanes, because mixing bicycles and pedestrians or bicycles and cars, they're both a bad recipe.
Yes.
Thank you. So I moved to Bellows Falls last April. I bought the house at 225 Rockingham Street. It's the one that I just had all the siding taken off, so it looks kind of haunted. But I'm getting new windows. Anyway, one of the things that I love about that house is that there's a sidewalk out front. My driveway is very small. I can barely fit 2 cars. So when I have folks come over, I have them park over on Meadow Lane and just cross the street and walk up the sidewalk, which is great until it snows. That sidewalk has not once been plowed all last winter. I live in the village. I pay taxes to the town of Rockingham and the village of Bellows Falls. I've seen other sidewalks in town get plowed. Why isn't mine? And who's going to change that? Thank you.
Anything else? Any other questions or comments?
I can certainly answer part of your question. The policy for the town who's responsible for plowing the sidewalks and the streets during the winter is that they keep one lane open throughout the winter time. Traditionally, they try to pick a southern side of a street so that the sun helps to melt the snow, but they don't have enough resources to be able to do all the sidewalk plowing, which we also do in Saxton'S River as well, and maintain the village by plowing both sides of all the streets with all the sidewalks.
There is no sidewalk on the other side of
So-
Rockingham Street where I live. There's a narrow shoulder. So that means that if anybody wants to visit me in the winter and there's been a lot of snow pile up in my driveway and only my car can fit, that means they're walking on Route 5 where tractor trailers come down with halves of houses on them. So again, who's going to make it so that people can come visit me in the winter? That's what I would like to know.
I'd
Thank
have to
you.
look at that one specifically. It doesn't, off the top of my head, I can't say which streets are on his sidewalk route and which aren't, but we'll certainly check into it.
When can you get back to me?
Well, I have talked to the highway foreman, so you can leave me your number and I'll call you this week.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments? If not, I'd like to say thank you, Katie, for the presentation. And we'll move on to item 2 on the agenda, the walk and bike committee update.
Which, as well, I'm Marsha Stern, I'm the chairperson of the Walk Bike Committee, which is a really enthusiastic, active committee, and most of us are here tonight. I actually printed out my notes. So that I don't have to say them all because I won't get through it in 5 minutes. I think I'm gonna start with the priorities because that's probably the most important things for you to know. Well, I'll start with the goals. We are a values-driven group, first of all. We really want to see more walkers and bike riders on the streets, both for reasons of health, for reasons, and because we're safer. The more of us that are out there, the safer we are. Makes drivers more aware of us, if we're bikers, pedestrians, and just as Katie was saying, to have fewer cars. If you're walking, you're not driving. There is the reality of winter. We know that people need cars here. We know that people need to park, but we can go part way. It's not Florida and it's not Holland, our dream world. But there's a lot that we can do to improve things. I also agree with Katie that the prosperity of the town is one of our goals, and we see that the walkability, the bikeability, that people, come here to bike ride, or they come to Vermont to bike ride. There's lots of good trails. If they can get around, if there's a town where they can get around by bike, where there are connections between trails, where they can park their fancy bike and feel that it's safe. Those are all things that are gonna benefit the town. And bring in people, when people come and they like the town, then they think, maybe I'll move here. And another goal is that we collaborate with people. We've been in existence for a year and a half. And we had a public meeting last November that was well attended. But since then, we haven't really had too much of a public presence. We want you to know we're here. We have the information. We're doing research, all of us, on the web, and becoming more and more expert on the best practices for how to design these things. I mean, we know that we need to work with consultants and so on, but because we live here, we know the specifics of, where the problems are, and we're thinking about how to solve them. And we want to keep you informed about that. So we ask for something, we can explain to you why this is the thing that we need. We have worked with the highway department, and he's been to a number of our meetings. We worked with the BIFDA, Ridwig, all the letter groups, trails organizations, which Connor's involved in, I believe. The Historical Society, because we're working on a riverfront park project. Scott and Gary, obviously, come to most of our meetings. We consult a lot with Local Motion, which is an organization that advocates for bikes and walkers. They're in Burlington. They're the ones who are responsible for a lot of these pop-up projects that Katie talked about. And finally, for collaboration, we want to increase public input. We're thinking of how to do a survey that really gets at what people feel about their immediate environment, what they feel they need to make it easier for them to leave their cars in the driveway. So at the moment, what we're working on, are more or less in order of priority from the top. Right now, we're working on getting a municipal planning grant that will fund a study to result in a traffic safety plan for the entire town of Rockingham. As you know, the town of Rockingham has a little piece of Westminster split up into it, and our ultimate hope is that we can we can apply together with Westminster for this traffic safety plan. If that doesn't happen, we know that we at least have their support to enable us to do the study continuously through Gageville. So, writing that grant, which is due in 1st of November, that's the first priority because of that deadline. We also feel strongly that we need to get a crosswalk across where the Arch Bridge comes to the Vermont side. It's just a snafu. There's no way to get across that so easily and safely. Cars don't know for sure what's going on, you know, who goes first. Just simply because there's no crosswalk. Crosswalk tells the pedestrians have the right of way. Bicyclists can walk their bikes across that. There's a lot of technical things that make these slow to happen, but this is our priority. Next after that, we want, you know, that there's a project to improve the safety at the School Street and Rockingham and Atkinson Street intersection. And we want to be sure that we're involved in that so that, because one of our long-term visions is to have Atkinson Street be a safer bikeway. And so whatever is developed in that corner, we want to make sure that it's not going to interfere with that plan, you know, so that bikes don't have to hump over a bump out or something like that. There's an intention of the state to survey towns along Route 5 as to the viability of the plan to make the entire Route 5 a bikeway. And so we want to be involved in that. The survey is coming to the towns, not to the general public. And we want to make sure that we can be there to give input on that. We were established as an advisory group, and now I think we're in a position where we know enough that we can help advise. Next after that is the Saxton'S River part. People on Saxton'S River, Stan is on our committee, he lives there. Rick lives in Cambridgeport. These communities also have their issues, and so we want to look at where's the best place to put crosswalks and bike racks in Saxton'S River. The Riverfront Park, which there's a scoping study that has been approved for that. And we're gonna participate in the local board that's gonna be formed to consult with the consultants. I don't know how to say that, but to participate in the design that goes into making that trail. That's supposed to be a multi-use trail for, meeting bikes, walkers, ADA compliant. It's quite a project, but it's going to be a crucial link. And one of the things that's particularly that you read about a lot in state documents and federal documents is connectivity, so that I think Katie talked about this a little bit too, so that you can walk greater distances or ride greater distances and not be stuck. If there's a small spot where you can't get through safely, or a bike rider doesn't feel safe, for example, they're not going to take that route. Even if it's, it's a tenth of a mile, it's a quarter of a mile, that's enough to keep someone from using the rest of the route. So that whole issue of connectivity is really important right now. And it's kind of a priority for the state. So it's something to be considered when you're applying for grants. And finally, we would like to see safer crossing at Green Street to get people to the other side. And this is relevant to what you raised, Wendy. The sidewalk between the Arch Bridge and Wendy's house probably really difficult to plow because it's in really bad condition. And it's in really bad condition because there's that drop off and there's a lot of geological problems. Ultimately, we'd like to see a study that makes, that transforms that area because it's really one of the most beautiful places in town. And, you know, it's gonna be right up there for tourists as well as the natives, you know. Right now, it's hard to get across that street and enjoy that area. So there are ways that hopefully, there will be ways that we can do that without going onto railroad property. And it's gonna take some creative thinking to make it happen, but this is, you know, what we hope for down the road. And if it goes in, if the state does finally start a Route 5 project, this is part of that. So if we can get ahead of the game on it, it'd be really great. I think I'd rather have questions than just keep them. Yeah.
You mentioned a board that was gonna be formed for the Riverfront Park. Can you tell me about that?
Jared, can you tell me?
Yeah, sure. It's the, all the municipal planning grants, as they get going, there's a steering committee involved that has representatives from local groups. So for instance, on the School Street Extension one, Highway Department, town staff, bike committee, superintendent from the schools, to have that broad input. So for the Riverfront Park, stakeholders would be the Historical Society, the bike committee, town staff. And we contract with the Wyndham Regional Commission for municipal project management. And so the items happen in a sequence. So the grants require a committed amount of time per week from someone familiar with traffic issues. And so we contract with, so Wyndham Regional sets up a municipal project manager, and those steps still have to happen for the Riverfront Park before the steering committee comes up. So municipal project manager comes to the select board, that gets approved, then it goes to the state for transportation alternatives to approve it. There's a lot of pieces, so the projects move slow, but they're good projects. They figure that 3 years to go through a transportation alternatives project. And what's good about them is that when the scoping is done this way with knowledgeable consultants that do a good job with highway scoping and sufficient public input. So the steering committee, and then like last Monday, there was a local concerns meeting for the intersection, which had a lot of the school folks who are most interested in that intersection come out to, as well as others. And so part of that 3-year project is the scoping is done well, and they have, I think, like $300,000 per project. That's what it was for a few years ago. It's possible it's more now, but and so there's a high likelihood they follow up the funding to build out the solutions if you go through this process. And they will tell you, if you talk to them, that leave a good 3 years to get through a project, to do it right to our satisfaction with the scoping, the ADA built like a, to be trans standards, all of those pieces.
So all that's done before a steering committee is formed.
The municipal project manager piece is set up, accepted by the select board, then accepted by the state, and then steering committee starts, and there's a local concerns meeting. And
I'm just wondering, because I don't think anybody at the Historical Society has heard anything about it.
there's not a municipal, so there's two separate projects. The one that's happening with local concerns is the School Street Extension. The Riverfront Park is a grant we just got. And so when that municipal project manager is approved by the select board, there's a contract, the state accepts them, then we go to the stakeholders and form a steering committee, and that's when the Historical Society is be approached.
Okay, I'm just trying to
So that's
understand.
months away still.
Yeah, that's a long way off there. Okay.
Not a long, a few months, but.
Yes.
Just on that connectivity issue, I don't know if you've looked into kind of connecting the village to the rail trail in Walpole, which connects all the way down through Keene in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And would really be a conduit to bring bicyclists up here on vacation.
And we have definitely thought about that when the Vilas Bridge is reconstructed. That's part of the plan, and we have already spoken with people in New Hampshire about that, and they're enthusiastic about it too.
Anything else? Yes.
Yeah, could you say more about what does it mean to be a state, was that state-long bike route for Route 5?
Yeah, this is something that a study of it was passed in the legislature. So there, according to information I've been given, the state is gonna send out a survey to all the towns on Route 5 to ask them how this sits with them, basically.
But like, if it looks like you might know, like, if that is a thing, what does it look like?
Yeah, so I just introduced myself. Gary had asked me to be here to kind of tack onto this agenda. My name's Colin Bratton. I work for the Regional Planning Commission, and we work with the town on a lot of different things and also work with V-Trans. And so the Route 5 survey, I will actually be the one who is like administering the survey in Windham County. And basically what it is V-Trans, they have, started doing these corridor studies to look at making improvements on various state highways to try to make them easier for people to walk and bike and do things like that. And so they're in the very early stages of looking at having, essentially a bicycle corridor all the way from the Massachusetts state line along Route 5 up to Quebec. And so this survey is basically is going to go out to towns to gauge interest in a basic way about whether or not that's something that towns are in support of. I think what it actually looks like once it's implemented is kind of a question, it's still up in the air and is going to depend a lot on the specifics of location. Like, I think they've had a lot of success with the Royal Valley Rail Trail, which I don't know how familiar people are with that, but that's up in sort of running across the northern part of the state. I think there's the thought that there could be sections of it that look like that, but that's probably not going to be the whole, there's not going to be space to do that on the whole length of it. And that's obviously not going to be done. The whole length of the state is not probably going to be done at one time. So I'd say it's an idea that V-Trans is kicking around and they're trying to gauge interest from, the towns along the Route 5 corridor to see if that's something that people want. And just the survey is going to be coming to the town. I am still waiting to hear from V-Trans about when exactly this is going to happen, but in the next couple of weeks, most likely.
So it's more than just a share the road sign?
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
right, that was what I was.
Yes, yeah, that was a long one, but but I think the thought is it's going to be more than just a share the road sign.
Cool. I'm also curious about, so you said you had funds for painting that sidewalk just north of the square?
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, like, is there a next step for you all, or are you waiting, the town or village for something there?
Scott,
Yeah,
a
we're
couple of
waiting
next
on
steps.
town
The
to-
parking lot is not in great shape. It needs to be repaved, so we're gonna put that on our paving request list for next year, so that can be redone, so that the surface that they would paint will be level and somewhat more prepared to accept the paint. So, and then that whole section right from the Legion all the way up to the Walgreens is where we're talking about painting a continuous pedestrian defined space. So that's on for next year, hopefully on for next year, we'll certainly be through the budget process, so hopeful. And we do have money from a grant from the engineer's office to help offset some of the costs of the painting as well, so.
Awesome, thank you. I think that's a great candidate for a place that needs more clear signage. Last question. I'm just curious, have you had any conversations with the railroad or hydro folks about? Yeah, is that just I don't know if that's a non-starter.
It's a yes, but most of our conversations with the railroad are short. The hydro is not terribly interested in this conversation until they get their first relicensing. They'll talk, but they won't act until they're relicensed, so.
Just because that's a shame, that so much of the waterfront is split between those two.
We bring that up on a continual basis.
Yeah.
To goal.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Yes.
So I just had a couple things to add. Gary had asked me to take care of, just about the connectivity and the sidewalk network. We, at the Regional Planning Commission, have money from the state right now to do like inventories and look at sidewalk conditions and connectivity in towns. And so we have spoken with the town to do that for Rockingham and look at the sidewalk network in the villages, both the conditions, ADA accessibility, you know, where are the crosswalks, where are there not crosswalks. And then also look at things, like, you know, we're mentioning in the presentation, like, are there dead end sidewalks versus where they're stopped? Are there places that people need to go that they can't get to because of the network? And so we're gonna be working on a report in the next couple months to bring to the town that's gonna, you know, list out all that stuff and provide you with information to, you know, help you make these decisions, think about that stuff moving forward.
Will there be a community meeting where there's input from those who are using the sidewalks to inform?
We could certainly, I mean, it's something that V-Trans is requiring, and so V-Trans wants this data, and I think that the thought is that we have guidelines from the state that we're gonna use to do this, and then once the report is completed, we can bring this to the town and certainly get input on things that could be added.
Anything else? Anyone? If not, we'll move on to item 3 on the agenda. The proposed revisions to the personnel policies and procedures.
We're here from our Human Resources Office, and I appreciate she's done a lot of work with this. We've had a preliminary meeting just with our Personnel Committee representatives, just to sort of say we're in a draft, we're still working through some issues here. But wanted them just to be aware of what was happening, so if there was comments or questions or concerns, they could certainly chime in. There's a host of changes that I think Heather's highlighted here. There's a couple things that I think just for maybe longer term board members, as well as folks that maybe are not as aware, that there are some exceptions to this, and one of those being the clerk, since the clerk is an elected position. There is a agreement that the clerk acknowledges, but in terms of actual compliance, that's a different relationship to the Vermont state laws, and the way that you're currently constituted with an elected position. The same thing is we do have some buy-in on these policies and some control from our Bellows Falls on-call firefighters, but our other firefighters are not necessarily covered by this, as their organizations are in a different kind of a structure. So that's another issue, just as we talk about how the things get applied and what's the overall coverage of all of these. So that sort of is an intro. Heather is here, and certainly if anybody has questions at this point, we're not asking you tonight to adopt. We're still going through a legal review. We thought it was a good idea, since it had been a while that anybody had looked at this from just an overall sort of legal employment law review, and I'm glad that we have, because there are some things that have changed even since we started this draft update. So we'll have to come back to you with some things that have changed in terms of our COBRA language and a few other things that are already state, or federal or state changes that we'll have to modify our handbook to comply. But that sort of is our beginning of the conversation. I just wanted to see if there was any questions at this point. I know it's a tremendous amount of material. It's been a tremendous amount of work. I think the organization is beneficial, because we can make changes in the future where we don't have to adopt all the policies or all the procedures. We can just add or basically change things in a much more reasonable fashion. So I appreciate your formatting, which will make it, I think, easier for us as we go forward. And certainly when we have new employees, it was difficult for us to try to get them up to speed with all of the different responsibilities that these outline from a personnel standpoint. This certainly is a lot more user-friendly for new folks to try to figure out if they have very specific concerns or questions, or just in general, what our safety procedures are. So it makes a lot of sense, I think, on that respect as well.
So any questions or comments from the board?
The on-call firefighters are not paid, right? They're volunteers?
No, the on-call firefighters in Bellows Falls, just with the Bellows Falls Fire Department, they are paid when they respond to a call or when they're in training or have any meetings with the firehouse.
Okay, so the people in the Rockingham firefighters and Saxton'S firefighters are not subject to these rules because they're
Correct,
volunteers?
because they're volunteers.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, sure.
I'm confused. What's the difference between personnel policies and a personnel handbook?
So the handbook is basically just procedures. These are what your benefits are. This is what happens if there's a disciplinary action. That, you know, it just has all the information that an employee might need to refer to if they have a question about how to handle a situation, what benefits they have, what. There's a really nice table of contents now. So, and the policies have more to do with, it'll talk about legal statute. So state and federal statute. So one of those would be discrimination policy. So I don't know, they're just, in a nutshell, it's the actual policy rather than just a little snippet of here's where you go if you have an issue or, I don't know, did that help? I feel like I'm just.
No, it's fine. I read through actually the policy one first. I haven't done much with the handbook yet, but is there I know there was for a while, but is the Village and Town Safety Committee currently active?
It is not.
But it's in here, so it's geared so it can be.
Yes, yes.
So I thought-
I think it was one of the things that dropped away a few years ago.
Yeah, probably during COVID too.
Yeah, so it's definitely on my list of things to get back up and running.
My last question was, maybe it's in here, I might have missed it because I haven't covered all of it. Is there a cell phone policy? I didn't
There's
see it.
not a cell phone
I
policy.
mean, I only say that because a lot of municipalities have
The police
municipal cell
department
phone
has
policy.
a cell phone policy. We have a use of social media policy
Saw that, no.
that is actually new that we didn't have.
Yeah.
But we, and a computer use as well. I've looked at these so many times that.
Right.
um,
Well, I saw Jill Muir's name mentioned in here.
Yes,
She might be able to give you a couple of them
yeah.
if you
yeah.
wanted to
Well,
look at it at some point.
VLCT has been actually really wonderful. Jill is currently looking over everything, and she's caught a few things, like Scott was saying, the COBRA. That language, that same language has probably been in the old personnel rules for 20 years. And apparently it's not, I don't know what about it yet is
Yeah.
not legal, but the language, I guess, is not up to snuff. So she is looking through it, and then we're going to be doing an actual legal review through Matt. So that it's just been, I think it's just been so long since any of this language has been looked at from a legal perspective that I want to be giving out something to our employees that is a legal document.
Where's it accurate, yeah.
Yeah. So.
Right.
So Heather, this is great. You've done a fabulous job of pulling together complexity here. It's mind numbing. Good job.
Yes.
One question, while we have Ian here, does the library employees follow the same, does this handbook apply to them? No.
No, they have their own handbook, but I will say that Sam Howard has been sitting in on committee meetings. And so we've been sharing information, and she definitely has access, and the library definitely has access to this as a model, once it's completed as a model document.
So there were any conflict between what this says and what the library manual says, what would happen?
I mean, I would think that I think the reason for this, this wasn't my decision, right? I think the reason for this is that there are two different unions, the library employees belong to one union and are members of one union, and the rest of the town employees who are eligible belong to a different union chapter. And so I think that's the genesis of some of this. And well, I don't know that it's the genesis, but I think it's reinforced that kind of notion too. And so I think Sam taking part, she is both the union steward of the library, the youth services librarian, and was, kind of a fly on the wall or whatever at this other thing. So we don't want there to be discrepancies between the library personnel policy and the town personnel policy. And so we'll be, talking about that stuff. But because there's been this historical separation between the two, and just recently, there were separate negotiations with the unions for the new contracts, and the result of those, involved some differences. Similarly, like I think the town ended up with a 2-year contract and the library ended up with a 3-year, and some of the terms within it are different. So there is different things happening, but and one could then ask the question, what prevails between the union agreement and the personnel policy if there is a disagreement between those things too? The union is my answer, absolutely, as well. That is the legal agreement that everyone signed. But, the question is a legitimate question. There's a good answer for it. And so I think in the future, some of these things can be ironed out. I would say that if nothing else, there should be a lot of nearly universal similarity between not the union agreements, but the personnel policies for the town and the library.
And I suspect they are.
I think that
It's
they're
been
very
a really
similar.
long time since
Yeah.
I looked at your agreement, so.
Yeah.
But I think in some areas of the handbook, what I'm now calling the handbook, there are sections that say, this is how things are, except it doesn't apply to the fire department or the police department. For the police department, the fire department, this is what they have to follow. And I think the same thing was happening with the library. So my guess is they were trying to make one document less cumbersome. So that it had, this is the rule for most people. And then if the library had something different, which I'm suspecting because of the union contract, it was just easier to pull that stuff out. So I'm guessing that a lot of it does mirror these policies, this handbook and policies.
Thanks for explaining that. It's helpful.
Anything else? Any other questions on this? I know we're going to be coming back to this once we hear from VLCT.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, and whether it's at a joint board or whether the trustees handle it and the select board handles it, we can probably work those details out too.
Yeah, I feel like we're finally kind of in that home stretch.
Correct.
So I'm really excited about that.
And thanks for all your hard work on this, really. Fantastic. Anything else on that? And if not, then I'll move on to item 4, the fire department financial feasibility study update.
We have had our kickoff meeting and have been working diligently with all 3 of our departments to try and get the initial data and put it into the study format that's necessary so that the consultants can do their analysis and then also schedule the next step for us, which is to come out and do a site visit. A little slow out of the gates, as you can imagine. It's a lot of time, a lot of effort, and been working with the departments to try to help smooth out some of the problems and getting all the technologies to line up. The good news is we all share the same interface for all of our fire information data, so that we can, once we fix the problem, so if the BF Fire Department figured out how to do it, we can help our Saxton'S River and Rockingham folks use the same formatting to help get the information that they have and then download it into the Dropbox that's going to the consultants. I had hoped to have tonight at least a rough schedule of when they might come for a site visit. When I talked to the AP Triton people last week, they still don't have all the data, so they couldn't give me how long it's going to take them to put together the first page of the analysis and then come out and then be prepared for the site visit. I'm still holding out some hope that they can come before the end of the year, because we're still interested in trying to get some of the data in front of the select board as we talk about budgetary issues and some of the bigger potential cost items that might come out of this study and some of the recommendations. So we've been pushing to try to get the data in as completely as possible so that they can move us into that next phase. I proposed on here a November 28th date, which is a little bit earlier than we would normally have, and part of the reason for that is to try and see if we can get all of this done so that we would have some sort of presentation at the tri-board for that particular date. So I've been trying to push towards that. You know, sometimes some of these processes need a goal in order to help sort of get all of the pieces together. So we're pushing in that direction, and we'll certainly let you know. But as of now, that is the goal, is to at least get them out here, do the site visit, and have something to present. Not a final report, but at least something that the boards can hear and get some feedback on, and be able to start to digest some of this information at that proposed November 28th meeting.
Question,
Yeah.
when we have a chance to talk face to face with the consultants?
That's one of the pieces of the actual proposal, yes.
Good.
Anything else? Any other questions, comments for Scott? Anybody? If not, we'll move on to item 5 on the agenda. Updated bridge replacement information.
So we have 3 bridges, and they all have different histories, different levels of funding, and sort of fitting in different time sequences. We have talked before, but just for general purposes, the Depot Bridge, as both boards are aware, have been moved back for a variety of reasons. I guess it's a good news, bad news proposition from the standpoint that it does give us enough time now on the village side to be able to work on utility issues on Canal Street, some stormwater management issues on Canal Street, and be able to do those as a non-participating cost in the contract that's awarded for the utility work for the bridge, so we can gain some economies of scale with that and still meet their schedule, because they won't actually start bridge work until April roughly of 26, based on their most recent schedule. And then they're gonna have a 3-year construction window roughly, again, depending upon how quickly they can get the pedestrian bridge in, how quickly they can get the new bridge in, and then how the third phase is the demo and removal of the old bridge. So you're looking at a fairly extensive process, starting with utilities in Canal Street and then moving into the two structures and then the demolition of the third. So there's going to be a host of challenges with that as we go forward. We have been working with our VHB and VTrans on a tree inventory, because there have been a lot of concerns raised in the community about the trees that might have to be replaced that are in the park now, and what we could do to make sure that, since it was a community-based project to start with, that we replace that inventory as closely to what was there as possible. So we'll have a report from an arborist who's been working on that project, a portion of the project, so the board's can be informed about that. Lots of details still to finish. The HPC has made recommendations about railings, which they, I believe, have agreed to work into the final design, so that had been a major point of discussion. The last one, which is seemingly absurd, but still somewhat of a problem, is lights for the bridge. Because they don't consider lights necessary on the bridge, we're gonna have to make a decision to fund those locally. So that'll be a local cost. Their feeling is pedestrians should be using the pedestrian bridge, and so cars and traffic should use the other bridge, and they don't see a need why it has to be lit. I don't understand the argument. I'm not an engineer. Be that as it may, it will add some additional cost if we decide to go forward with that as well.
Other questions?
Right.
So Scott, we gained about $400,000 when we got 100% match instead of the standard 80% match. We got that letter, what, about 8 weeks ago or something like that?
the portion of the actual construction cost, because the state had put some additional funds into their construction portion. So we are responsible for any acquisition of right of way, meaning the town. We're responsible for any of contaminated soil removal. And we're also responsible for design costs, preliminary design and engineering. All the construction related costs, which are normally a 90-10 or 80-20, is now handled by the state. So we'll see some advantage to that for sure.
Have you checked with the feds to make sure that that grant won't expire because of this delay?
It expires in 2028. So they had pushed it up to the very edge of where they could possibly go in terms of the funds.
So if they were to delay it again,
That could be a huge problem. But as of now, the schedule that they've laid out will in fact keep us within the eligibility of the funds that they've appropriated.
and are they aware of what we stand to lose if they don't?
They are aware.
And is there any incentive for them to help us out?
Based on our discussion about lights on the bridge, I don't know what they think. I guess I'll put it that way. I just can't answer sometimes. Things that happen. I don't understand.
It's a lot of money.
So, but yes, they are aware. It's a significant impact for us. So they are aware.
Thanks.
The second bridge that we're all obviously paying attention to is the Vilas Bridge. And we had handed out in your packet just so that you can be aware that the 10-year transportation improvement plan, which is again in New Hampshire, because the majority of the bridge is actually in New Hampshire, and that's where the monies will actually go. We are still fully funded. That's all the good news. Again, because it seems like any DOT project has to have at least one delay, if not more. They pushed this project out. As you can see now, they don't start actual construction until 2029 on that bridge. Don't know why. Really, at this point, don't have any additional information. I don't believe there's any reason for us to be concerned. It's just, again, more of a timing and sort of impact. As you look at, you have three structures fairly close together. For sure, one of them is going to be under construction for most of, the utilities starting in 25 through at least 28 on Depot, which would then basically lead you right into this bridge, potentially under construction in 29. And they have this project as well, not concluding until 2031. And we're still waiting on the Bridge Street Bridge, which the last cycle of funds we applied for, regional bridge reconstruction funds, that they tried to create a priority list of bridges that would be potentially elevated to funding. Bridge Street was on that list, did not get funded back in 2023. My understanding is they might try to redo that same cycle of funding again in 2025. So we'll keep the boards informed. If they do, they'll probably be sending notices sometime in 2024, informing us again, and we'll try to apply funds for that bridge as well. So.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Anything? If not, we'll move on to item 6 on the agenda.
So speaking of things that eventually expire, we were talking about ARPA funds next. So just, I guess, this list is really more for just informational purposes now. We have a host of projects that both the town and the village have started to narrow into implementation phases, because we have to again have this money spent by the end of 2024. I don't anticipate that any of the funds will be extended, at least not the current political environment. If the political environment changes over the next 18 to 24 months, maybe there might be some extension. But at this point, I would not anticipate any of those funds being available past that 2024 end date. So it does put some sort of action or pressure on to complete the list that we currently have in front of you, to try to make sure that we can take full advantage of these funds. We've been leveraging as many of them as we can with other grant funds and trying to get as much additional benefit from these as we can. So some of the delays just on spending are just related to other grants that we're trying to also supplement, for example, the roof in this building. We're going through a process for energy efficiency, and as soon as that we're finished with that review through the Wyndham Regional folks, if we qualify, we'll be eligible up to $500,000 worth of potential replacement of that membrane with something that's energy efficient and would also help us insulate for snow in the winter. And it certainly needs to be replaced. It's leaking terribly. We're patching it as best as we can, but it's sort of a losing battle at this point. So we're hopeful that we can push that process with this evaluation as fast as we can to try and get those funds lined up so we can get our, get our membrane placed up there, and then look at other alternatives if we possibly can for other energy efficiency types of alternatives. The other big sort of broad expenditure category, which we really haven't put into specific program use, is the housing restoration portion. A lot of that, I think, is going to be discussed as we go through. We have a couple of meetings in October on site where we're going to do some analysis and evaluation and talk about infill development and opportunities. And I think it's really going to be, again, we sort of have a programmatic outline. It's by no means any great detail, but it sort of gives you a sense of how we could use some of these monies to potentially create buildable lots that might then be able to help folks in not necessarily in an affordable sense, but more of a missing middle type of sense, where people could build and own that might not be able to do that without having, the land costs and the cost of maybe removing structures that might not be rehabable, and having those spaces then built out to have your housing put back into its place. So that's a project that still will get some, we're hopeful to get some additional detail as we go through that process and really try to put that into a workable format so we can start to see those funds really being applied and see some real tangible results from that as well.
Any questions or comments on the ARPA funds? Miller. Yes.
I have a question not specifically about the ARPA funds, but I have a question about the infill plan that Mr. Pickup just referenced. Are there public meetings, hearings and things where folks in the public can come and learn about that and maybe comment?
John, I think the meeting's the 18th, and I think that's most of the day on the 18th. There will be some more publicity about that. There will be a public meeting.
Okay.
So, but it's like a 2 to 6, if I remember. There's going to be some field visits and then some work back in this building. So we'll get some more information out here shortly on that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just a little bit of personal input. I'm kind of sticking my neck out maybe on this, but I'm not sure I really understand the necessity of the public safety building sound report. My opinion.
Well, I guess I'll put it in a couple of different pieces of why I think it's beneficial. There's an officer safety issue by having a secured cell report, which would also then give you access to a secured prisoner handling area for processing, as well as towards the jail cells. It's a much safer way to handle folks that are under arrest, and we unfortunately do have those folks periodically. Second piece is the equipment that we do have. Our police vehicles sit out in the wintertime, and in a lot of cases they'll sit and idle because the officers have to be able to go out and have all their electronics working in the vehicle. So in many cases, it'll sit out in the snow in the wintertime and idle for extended periods, which is not great for the long-term health of the community because of the idling vehicle, as well as the vehicle itself, because it's sitting out in the snow and not at least, having an opportunity to be undercover. So those are the two of the primary benefits to that.
Anything else?
I might add one thing to that.
Sure.
That when they seize vehicles, they don't have to
Common is a third one.
be, they won't have to be, I wouldn't say won't have to be, but it might eliminate the need storm in the fire station bay.
Right.
Like they did, there was one there a couple weeks back, that was there probably for 10 days or close to it.
Yeah, I mean, periodically, if there's, right, Vermont State Police or other type of activity, or we have a significant accident with injuries or death, sometimes they'll ask us to impound the vehicles until they can be thoroughly inspected and then go through a process. We don't have a secure facility, as Wade had mentioned, for that, so we have to then stick them somewhere. We've stuck them in the garage periodically, we've stuck them at the public safety building periodically. So it is a potential problem.
Any other questions on that? Yes.
For what it's worth, I support Mr. Zimmer's doubt that that's the best use of ARPA money, and I wonder if there's another way to fund something like that. Thank you.
It's a covered structure you drive into.
Sorry, I wasn't aware what a sally port was.
Fancy word for garage.
Anything else on item 6, the ARPA projects? If not, I'll move on to item 7 and actually turn this over to Peter.
Item 7 is a request for the use of Waypoint Center. We have an application in the packet. It's for the Bellows Falls Pride. They're having some event down there. They are asking for a reduction in fees, which is non-negotiable at this point. I have a policy here. Base fee is a $30 fee, and it's for a reduction, it's forms to request a reduction of the facility rental fee, not the base fee. The base fee is charged for all users of the Waypoint Center. The base fee cannot be waived or reduced for any organization, profit or non-profit. The only exception to that is for the Bellows Falls Village, Town of Rockingham, or Vista. If they use it, they can get waived. So there will be a $30 fee attached to this somewhere. And the manager is authorized to sign the application.
Okay, then we'll move on to item 8. There any questions, comments on that? If not, we'll move on to item 8. There's a banner application for Village, again, that's in your packet for the trustees. It's the Bellows Falls Pride. Looks like they want to hang a banner October 2 to October 16th, 2023. I guess I'd entertain a motion to
I'll move that the village trustees approve the application for hanging a banner from October 2nd to October 16th for the Bellows Falls Pride organization.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Has to be trustees.
I'll second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So motion's been made and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I just have one, there might be a conflict with that, because I think there, I don't know this for sure, but possibly fire prevention banner that gets put up. Is that done?
I haven't put it up yet, we could do it. I think when it's fire prevention month, if I remember. Isn't it the whole month?
No.
We did the whole month.
I just happened to think of that, because the parade is, I think, the 15th. That is the 15th of Sunday?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
8th through the 14th is fire prevention week.
14th.
8th through the 14th.
Sean would know. He's
Yeah.
gotta do that. Just thinking of it.
Hasn't mentioned anything, but we'll certainly work with them to try to make it work.
So I guess the question is, Scott, do we want to okay this and then, and it may not go, it may go from the October 2 to October 8.
Right.
And then October 8, the fire prevention week banner would go up.
Sure.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
So there is that possibility so that everybody understands it. Right now, we will approve October 2 to October 16th with the caveat that the fire prevention
And I'll ask, yeah. I'll ask
would
the
take
fire chief.
priority, and that may end up going up October 8th.
Yep.
So kind of that's way we're gonna reform the motion. Is that acceptable to the maker?
I can do that.
Okay, and then seconder, okay. So motion been made, seconded that we would approve the banner application for Bellows Falls Pride, which is now set October 2 to October 16th, but may be changed from October 2 to October 8 only, with the fire prevention banner going up October 8. Everybody have the motion in mind? Those trustees, all those in favor would say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. And the motion carries.
Gotcha. All right. Jake just voted by phone. In case we're-
Perfect. So we'll move on to item number 9, and kind of, I'm looking at Rick and Bonnie for the town meeting survey.
Yeah, so, Rick and I, got together and we just came up with 10 simple, sort of questions or prompts. And, we'd like to, do this through Survey Monkey and, have to find out, more details. I think it's, $100 a month for unlimited use. So we have to decide if we want to allocate some money for this. And I just want everybody to see what we came up with and anything people would like to take out or add to this list or have any thoughts on it.
As you guys will recall from last year's town meeting, there's a lot of discussion about whether we can continue, given the falling attendance, this grand New England tradition of direct democracy via town meeting. And there are lots of different feelings as to its efficiency and as to the importance. You've heard some of those discussions at town meeting last year. So Bonnie and I figured it would be good to get some input, see how people might react to other approaches to a town meeting. And so that's what this survey intends to do. We will be, if it's approved, we would post it on various websites, Facebook, Front Porch Forum. We would put out a poster. I would write a press release that would go out to the shop for every reformer. So we get as much input from our fellow Rockingham citizens as to what they want to do and what's valued and what the other options may be.
I guess for the people in the room, you don't have a copy of this, so I'll just read it quickly. First 2 questions will be on a slider, like, do you agree, do you disagree? Number 1, New England town meetings are a worthwhile tradition that brings voters together in person to discuss and vote on important matters that affect the entire community. Town meetings ensure level democracy and transparency in government. They should continue to be held as in-person events. Agree, disagree. Number 2, with the technologies we enjoy in today's busy world, we no longer need to insist that every voter attend town meeting in person in order to vote on important matters. The articles on the warrant can be voted on by Australian ballot on election day. Agree, disagree. So it requires a little thinking. Number 3, and then we just have a checklist. Check all the things that that discourage you from attending. Monday evening is inconvenient. 7 p.m. is not a good time. Having the school board meeting at the same time makes for a long night. If the school board comes first, really long night. Lack of transportation, lack of childcare. The discussion and debate becomes tedious. I often don't understand the articles being presented and how they may affect me. I'm simply not that interested, and other with a comment line. Yes, no, just feeding into some of those prior questions. Should we schedule the school board meeting for a different time? Would holding the meeting on a Saturday afternoon be better for you? Would having childcare available make it easier for you to attend? Would having transportation available make it easier for you to attend? What day or time do you think it would be best for an in-person town meeting? And number 10, comments and thoughts.
Yes.
Thank you. I have two suggestions. One, Mr. Cowan mentioned sending a press release to the Shopper and the Reformer. That's a great idea. Also, please send it to the Commons. Their paper's free. It has a wide readership, and their website is not paywall. So that would be a great resource. Also, some towns, I don't know if you thought about this for the survey, some towns in Windham County and probably elsewhere combine their town meeting with like a potluck meal. And I'm wondering if that would be something that you think would be appropriate to put in the survey to see if that, you know, if folks would like something like that, because that tends to maybe bring more people and also make it more of like kind of a cohesive community effort.
So that's something we discussed at our select board meeting.
Westminster's done that for years.
And Westminster does something like that. I guess we could add that question, but is that, I think when we discussed it, there was some concern that we weren't sure we wanted to go there. You need sit-down tables and, you know, there's a lot that goes with that. Where would we have the space to do that? And what do you eat during the meeting, before the meeting, everything? It just seemed like maybe for now, at this level of decision, kind of keep that out of it, but I don't know.
Yes, sir.
I believe in participation is the best survey. My question is, with all of the possible scenarios that you played, are any of those institutional that would then take another event, like changing the day, changing the time, changing the school committee meetings? Are those, could you do those just unilaterally?
I believe so.
Well, you have
Select board,
to accept it in your warning, so when you adopt your
Yeah.
warning in January, it has to be in there. So there is some requirement for notice in public.
Right, but the select board sets the,
But there's no institutional that says it has to be on a Monday, so there's nothing really, yeah, there's nothing built into
The only requirement is it has to take place within the boundaries of the town.
of the town. So that's
why the high school's out.
I was just, my only thought behind that questioning was, you know, try two things, change the school committee meeting and participation, you know, gauge it that way. I mean, the survey is always good, but reaching people is a more difficult event.
well, we thought we'd just try and see if we get some response and see what the response is, particularly with the first two statements. Do you agree? Do you disagree? I know people feel strongly on both sides of that.
And I'm in favor of meetings, so.
Well, I most of the select board as well, but it doesn't seem right to make big decisions with only 30, 40 people in the room, and you've got a town of almost 5,000. So it feels that we're responsible to address that in any way that we can, so.
Yeah, Bonnie, I have a small comment. Amy Howlett from Saxton'S River. I'd love to see a definition of Australian ballot. It's something that most of us know, but survey takers, at least in my experience, are not always familiar with that term.
Good idea. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, I would just add to your list of, fact that we can put on Fact TV into the survey and on Roll. Yes,
Yeah, we'll probably try to line up an interview with Fact TV as a whole. You know, I mean, do everything that we can.
Yeah.
And we could go so far as to print up a postcard, and mail it to every resident, which is something I was going to discuss with the select board, because that is a little costly, but just find out from, from the town clerk's office, what does it cost with your bulk mailing to mail something like that to every resident? If we could help like that.
But I've got a comment.
Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, well, of course, I'm not a real fan of surveys, and I think that your first two questions are almost, too wordy in terms of it almost expresses an opinion, but that's beside the point. My point to you to make is, in listening to you mention the school board meeting, it almost sounds like somewhere off in the other part of town, there's a school board meeting. I think what you're talking about is the fact that we have both the town meeting with the town budget and also the Rockingham school meeting with the Rockingham school budget, which of course is voted on by Australian ballot. Do you think that's clear in your, because I think what you're saying is you want to, do people want to eliminate the school board meeting from the town meeting? Is that what you're getting at?
That's what I was getting at, but you don't think that's clear?
I don't think it's clear. And of course, the problem that creates is then the Rockingham school board would have to have another public meeting, which is ridiculous. I mean, it's just ridiculous. We can't get enough people to this meeting. So, if we want transparency and we want to encourage people, I think to separate them would be a mistake.
So your answer to that question would be no.
It would be no, if I take that survey.
A question, if you're gonna put this out there, a survey, and it's gonna be out on Facebook and everything else, how are you gonna dictate whether it's town people that are actually doing that survey versus anybody and everybody fills it out? So you could get 500 people, but only 100 of them are Rockingham residents, and the other could be, God only knows who.
But we
So
could
you
also
skew
offer
your
free,
whole survey right
free
on.
popsicles to everybody in
Just
Brattleboro to take the survey.
They can put their address on it.
I don't know. I don't know, when we talked about this before, we didn't really go into that.
No.
I'm not sure how you can, because you want it to be anonymous, I think.
You might be able to do it through SurveyMonkey, because your ISP, you'd have to be in town actually doing it, it could be done through the ISP. I don't know, you have to look at SurveyMonkey to see technically if it's possible. They might.
Yeah, you could even just check off your zip code, like give options for the zip code.
Yeah, but then you'd have 05143, which is Chester and it's Bartonville, and it's Cambridgeport.
Don't forget. Yes.
In general, this survey seems like a great way to gather information, and just on that last point, there is a possibility of gathering information that is imperfect and using it knowing that it's imperfect. And I think that moving forward with a survey like this allows you to at least have more information than you have right now, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, I kind of think so too, and I don't know why somebody would even bother with it. Unless we offer free popsicles.
Participation's a problem, right? So, yeah, too much.
If they didn't have it.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I doubt there's gonna be a lot of ballot box stuffing for the survey, but I support sending the postcard, even though there may be an extra cost if there's somewhere that money can be taken from, because I think I maybe made this point at town meeting when we were discussing getting more people out. We were talking about mailing the annual report to everybody, and what other towns in Wyndham County have done when they stopped automatically mailing the annual report was, as a sort of transition effort, was to send a postcard to every address in town saying, here's where you can find the annual report online with a link, you know, to the URL. And also here are the physical places that you can find the annual report, like at the library, et cetera. And so I think by sending that postcard about the survey, we're training people, we're getting them used to looking in the mail because something important is coming from the town that's asking for their participation. And that's what we want.
Anything else on this?
Yeah, I would just echo that. I think this is a big question that is, if you kind of try to get participation halfway on the survey, I just wouldn't want this question to keep coming up every town meeting, right? And so I think it's worthwhile, if we're gonna put in the time and effort to try to answer this question, let's put in a little bit of extra money as well to get as much participation as we can in the survey, and then hopefully for a while close the question.
Well, you know, looking at that, another thing we could do is just print this and mail it to everybody. And ask them to mail it in or drop it off.
I'm not participating.
So, you know,
Yeah.
So anyway, I think the select board will take this up again. And if we're gonna do this, we'd like to get it going before November, you know. so people have the information
back so you can set your warning.
Yeah, so we have to do that and move on it, so. Thanks, everybody. For
Yes.
taking that. Thank you.
One more, I'm not a micromanager, I swear, but if you send the actual survey out, put a self-addressed stamped envelope, because it's gonna be
I
like the
know,
lowest
so
bar.
the expense is going up and up and up.
Yeah.
So we'll have to look into that, yeah.
But another thing is just send the card, put the link to, you know, to online. And then also where you can pick it up, similar to what you said with the town report. You can pick it up. You don't want to do it online, pick it up here and here and here.
Right, yeah, that's another thing. The planning commission did a survey, when was that, Bob? I don't know. Long time ago.
Yeah.
And we made postcards, but the postcards, we didn't mail them out to people, but put them all around town in the library. And I sat out there in the heat and passed them out at the recycling center. And what did we get? About 300 responses, something like that. Which I thought was abysmal, but everybody told me that's good.
So Brian, you and I will come back to the select board with a proposal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we'll talk about this, you know, it's a town issue, town's gonna have to pay for whatever we do, so. Just wanted to get some feedback from, you know, the trustees of the villages and stuff.
Anything else then on that item? If not, we'll review the agenda items for our next meeting, which is November 28th, 2023.
So hopefully we'll have the fire feasibility. That's really the primary reason for that. Then have an update on sale, and the discussion about that, where we stand.
Anything else from the board that we'd like to have on that meeting?
So clarification, because I think in our previous conversations, the tax sale target date was more early fall, but it sounds like it's pushed back.
Yeah, we've had a few things that have come up. We're also working with Saxton'S on some stuff as well, so we're gonna try and push it back a little bit. So.
I'm wondering,
Yes.
we have a report from the cemetery commission. I know there's been a lot of conversation about maintenance and who's doing what and what hasn't been done and what needs to be done. What if we could have Walter come and talk to us briefly about, does he chair that commission?
Diana Jones is chair of the commission.
Okay, so we.
Yes, that's something that we have been talking about. We do plan to come in November. We were going to come to the select board, but if the other boards are interested, we could come to the tri-board meeting. Or we can come to it. Because I think by then we'll have a lot more solid assessments and recommendations developed. And we can move it.
a decent report. Good. Anything else? If not, we'll move on to review and approve orders, bills, and warrants.
I move that we approve the orders, bills, and warrants.
Is there a second? Motion been made, seconded by the village trustees to approve orders, bills, and warrants. All in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Peter?
Motion, need a motion to review and approve, order bill warrant, please. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion made and seconded to review and approve orders, bills, warrants. Any discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carried.
All
And
right,
they're coming around.
as soon as we get them signed down this end, we'll send them your way. We'll move on to other business. Is there any other business to come before the tri-board? Anything? Anything from the community? If not, we'll move on to executive session if necessary. My understanding that we do not have a need for executive session. And then we would move on to adjournment. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Motion been made, seconded, that we adjourn. All in favor would say aye.
Aye.
And we are now adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you guys coming.
Record.